we have talked about the cell cycle and how cells go from being one cell to being two cells. Today, we're going to talk about how cells go from being one cell to being a bunch of different types of cells, right? Because we've got a lot of different types of cells in our bodies, right? We've got skin cells and eye cells and brain cells and heart cells and muscle cells. But we all start off as one cell. So how do we get from one cell to all these different types of cells with different jobs and different tasks? That process is called cell differentiation. So my goal for you is to be able to explain why differentiation is important, especially to multicellular organisms like us. Bless you. So I have created a guided sheet for you. And this right here in black right here is your big question. So that's the first thing you've got written down. We all start off as one cell. How do we go from that one cell to so many different types of cells? Yeah. You can if you want, but this is our big question. They're technically the same question. I've just kind of increased a term for you. How do cells become specialized? We kind of talked about this a little bit. When did we talk about this? When we talked about cell organelles, and I said some cells have different numbers and types of organelles. There's pencils in the pencil dispenser right behind you. Always have resources for you. Okay. So we've got a bunch of different types of cells that do a bunch of different types of things, just like you have a bunch of different teachers that teach a bunch of different subjects. So, how do we get these specialized cells? How do we get these cells that have different jobs? The process is called differentiation. Differentiation is the process by which we get specialized. Do you need this? Okay. In some organisms, like C. elegans, that's a scientific name, it's essentially a little worm. They're really popular in the world of studying development, like biological development. When C. elegans is developing from an egg into its whole worm body, at a certain point, everything is determined. They say, okay, these cells are going to be nerves, these cells are going to be skin, these cells are going to be digestive system, full stop. Nothing's going to change. They're done. They're set. They know what their path is, and they're going to follow that path. There's no changing it. In other organisms, like you and me, we go through a more flexible process. Some cells can be nudged in a different direction. So we've got a bunch of different interacting factors that get us going, that help tell our brain cells to be brain cells and our lung cells to be lung cells and our digestive system cells to be digestive system cells. Yeah. Fun. Just fix it on the sheet. I'll make sure to fix it for the next time I print. So this is our process. It's called differentiation. This is the answer to our big question, is this process. We got a bunch of different cells coming from one or two different types of cells. And sometimes that process can be tweaked, sometimes that process can be influenced, and sometimes that process is strict and unmoving. At past the point in development where everything is determined, if you were to take a chunk of cells out of what would become the digestive system of a C. elegans, and you were to put it on its back and embed them with the back cells, the skin cells, they would still become digestive system cells. They would still be like intestinal cells, but on the outside of this C. elegans body, because its role is determined. It's already set. We're going to focus a little bit more on human development because we can relate to human development a little bit more. I was in a class once where, like, for the entire semester, so from the beginning of the school year to winter break, all we did was talk about development, and we focused on 3 organisms: C. elegans, those little worms, fruit flies, and humans. So, the first cell of a new embryo is called a zygote. So at all points in time, at one point in time, you and I were just one cell. We call that one cell a zygote, and we call it a zygote the minute an egg becomes fertilized. Sperm meets egg, fertilization happens, boom, zygote. We call this zygote totipotent. Totipotent. Which means from this one cell, we are going to get cells that become what would eventually be a body and what could eventually be a placenta. The placenta is like a little sac that a baby develops in, keep it safe. And when an egg becomes fertilized, that zygote has to make its own placenta. So that first cell has the ability to become any type of cell, a placenta cell or a body cell. 4 days after fertilization, a zygote will divide to form something called a blastocyst. A blastocyst is a hollow ball made of cells with a cluster of cells inside, like a Kinder Surprise, those little chocolate balls with candy inside, like that, but with cells that would eventually become, or could eventually become, a person. That little cluster of cells inside that ball, they are called pluripotent cells, because that little cluster would eventually become an entire organism, an entire human, could eventually become an entire human. So those cluster of cells in the middle, they are called pluripotent because they can become any body cell whatsoever. The outside of that ball, what would make up that ball, is going to be only placenta cells. So we've kind of lost that totipotent idea. And now we have pluripotent, which means any body cell. Eyeball cells, skin cells, brain cells, heart cells, lung cells, liver cells. All of those are in or have the ability to be made by these pluripotent cells. We call these cells stem cells. How many of you, by show of hands, have heard the word stem cell before? Maybe? Cool. We call an unspecialized cell, so a cell that hasn't quite found its job yet, that will eventually lead to all these different types of cells, these differentiated cells, stem cells. Because all the body cells in our bodies came from this one cell. So it's like the stem, the root of all of these cells. I think in Spanish, they are called mother cells. They're the same thing, they're just different names because languages are fun. And we can classify stem cells into two categories: adult stem cells and embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells, we've already talked about. Those are those little pluripotent cells inside the blastocyst, inside that little clump of cells. Adult stem cells we have in our bodies right now. You have stem cells in your body right now. All over, actually. Like I said, these embryonic stem cells, those we've already talked about, those are pluripotent. They can become anything. They are the little cells inside the blastocyst after about 4 days post-fertilization. Embryonic stem cells are pluripotent. Adult stem cells are found all over the body, usually in little clusters. One of the easiest to remember are bone marrow. Inside your bones is a blood factory. All of your blood cells are made inside your bone marrow. That is why when people are diagnosed with leukemia, a lot of the time there are bone marrow transplants involved in order to try to get those stem cells inside of their bones going and kicked up and started and making healthy cells again. There are also adult stem cells in your hair follicles, your heart, your liver, and your brain. We call adult stem cells multipotent because they're limited to where they can replace cells, right? The adult stem cells in your liver can make any type of liver cell, but they can't make skin cells. The stem cells in your bone marrow can make all of your blood cells, your white blood cells, your red blood cells, all of those, but they can't make brain cells. So they're a little bit more specific in what they can do, but they are still super duper important. These are adult stem cells. So we've got totipotent, we've got pluripotent, and now we've got multipotent. These are adult stem cells. Now, stem cell research is a relatively new field of study that is groundbreaking when it comes to medical treatments. We're going to watch a video about it in a second. It has made it possible to create a field of study called regenerative medicine. Medicine used to regenerate damaged or harmed parts of the body. Where we can take stem cells and use them to make new tissues. So if someone had, these bone marrow transplants that are popular with leukemia treatment, they are kind of like one of our first forays into regenerative medicine. Like if somebody had a cancerous or non-cancerous tumor and we had to go in and take out a chunk of some sort of organ or some sort of system, the hope is that with regenerative medicine, we could program stem cells to rebuild those parts that were broken or lost. But when it comes to stem cell research and using these cells, there's a lot of ethical concerns that come up. Typically not with adult stem cells. Usually bone marrow transplants aren't like opposed because adults can give consent and donate willingly. But when it comes to embryonic stem cells, it's controversial. Because we are going to get into, we aren't going to get into, but people tend to get into what is life, what is death, where do we draw those lines? And embryonic stem cell research is very controversial because we've got these ethical issues of life and death. What is life? What is death? Why are we using these cells that have the potential to become a person for research? So embryonic stem cell research isn't happening very often, if at all. But we found a way around it. We found a loophole to where we can get these pluripotent cells, these type of embryonic stem cells that can become anything, from regular old cells. And that process is called cellular reprogramming. By studying things like genetics and cell signaling, scientists are able to take a cell that already has its role, already has its job, and cause it to become capable of reproducing other cells. Because all cells have the same DNA. Every cell in your body has the same DNA in it. It just chooses to listen to some of it rather than others. So scientists have found a way to get these cells listening to different parts of their DNA. And they have kind of converted them back to something that resembles an embryonic stem cell. And we call these induced pluripotent stem cells. Cells that we made become pluripotent. Yes. Pluripotent. This process called cellular reprogramming is super duper cool. Questions here? Did anybody not get a blank? Yeah. Pluripotent. Embryonic stem cells are pluripotent, meaning they can become any type of body cell. Questions here? All right. So, here is the plan for the rest of the class period. I have 2 short videos for you about about stem cell research and about advancements in this field, just to kind of reinforce what we talked about today. So, this will not take the whole class period, so I just need your attention for another 10 to 15 minutes. I am passing out little half sheets of paper. On these half sheets of paper, as we watch these videos, I want you to come up with 5 questions. Being able to ask questions is hard. I understand. I struggle with it too sometimes. But practice makes perfect, and the only way we're going to get practice is if we do it. Give me a second. So, as we watch these videos, I want you to write down 5 questions. Then I want you to put your name on this and turn it in. Did I cut the exact right amount of these? No, I have one extra. Cool. All right. So there's going to be one video about what stem cells are, and another video about how we have started 3D printing human tissues with what we know about this. Super cool. So, anybody have any questions about what's going on? All right.